Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
The jury began deliberating for a second day.
Yes.
In Donald Trump's hush money case after hearing, again, testimony from two key witnesses and, of course, receiving, again, instructions from the judge as to how exactly they should be handling things in that deliberation room.
Which makes you wonder what sort of big picture questions they have here if they're going back to the instructions and some of the most important testimony about that meeting at Trump Tower in 2015. But look, we don't pretend to know what's happening inside the jury room. And if anyone does, they're probably putting you on. We'll have the news when it breaks here on Bloomberg. The question we're asking, Kailey, is what will be the political implications of this verdict one way or the other? And a new poll would suggest none.
Yeah, PBS NewsHour, together with NPR and Marist, releasing data today that finds 67% of voters said a conviction would make no difference for them in November, including 74% of independents. And actually, the data finds 25% of Republicans said they would be even more likely to vote for Donald Trump if he were to be found guilty by a jury.
Some have suggested that Donald Trump embrace this idea of incarceration, if only to spend one night, because of the martyr effect that it could have on his campaign. That might be partly where you're going here. Let's bring the panel in. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Our signature panel is back on a day that could bring some awfully important news. Rick, what do you make of this number? Obviously, it's difficult to tell the way it's going to feel when it really happens, but voters are telling pollsters essentially that they don't care. Do you believe them?
You know, look, I mean, the only thing that matters is the margin in these key battleground states that will decide the outcome of the election. And we remember in 2020, those margins were pencil thin. I mean, just 20,000 votes here, 10,000 votes there decided the outcome of a presidential election. So when you look at these polls writ large, great, 60% of the country say they don't care. But if there's 5% of Republicans who are impacted by this, who would think less of Donald Trump or decide to stay at home because they can't vote for a guy who's just been convicted of a crime, that is material to the outcome of the election. So it's really, you have to look under the data and find who are the movers. We know from previous surveys that there are a group of Republicans who would be considered Trump base, who, if he were convicted, would reconsider their support for him. Doesn't mean they're going to vote for Biden, but not voting, if you're a Trump supporter, is basically the equivalent of voting for Joe Biden.
Yeah, well, to your point, Rick, you got to look at all the data, and it is worth pointing out that in this poll, 10% of Republicans and 11% of independent voters said they would be less likely to vote for Donald Trump if he is found guilty. So, Jeanne, to Rick's point about how this is going to come down to so few voters in so few states, does it matter if it matters for many or only if it matters for few?
You know, in the end, it only really matters if it matters for a few, to use that word twice, in those key states. And now, the number of states we're even talking about, in some people's estimation, has narrowed down to 3. But even if you go broad and say it's 6 or 7, this is a very, very small number of people that we're talking about who can swing this thing. And the other thing I would just caution about these polls is, as good as the pollsters are, and they're very good, asking these kinds of questions and getting solid data response is tough. If I hear a question as a voter, will X change your mind? Well, you don't really know what the voter is thinking. People don't want to sound like their vote will be, is up for grabs based on the decision of 12 people in New York. There's all kinds of issues that can impact these responses. And we obviously don't have a history to look back on to guide us. So we really are, you guys were talking about this being, sort of, all crazy on the Western Front. We are also in no man's land. We really don't know how this thing is going to turn out. And if we get a decision today or tomorrow, we're not going to be feeling the effects of that until November. So we're still a bit of a ways off.
So how do you plan a campaign around that, Rick? Obviously, you can't do much to plan other than allow for many different scenarios. If your candidate was in court here, waiting for this verdict to drop. How would you be preparing the public response?
Look, you would have different tracks, right? So there's one track that acquittal, and that writes itself. You don't have to go very far to find Donald Trump talking about how, he's been, attacked relentlessly by these, scams and fake news and conspiracy theories. So that's easy, and it'll all land on Joe Biden, right? So Trump will make sure this was the Biden court case. If it's a conviction, and at any number of the 34 counts that are currently being considered, then it's a much more complex thing in the sense that you're sure going to say, oh, this is just, it's the grievances. He's going to say, it's not me they're convicting. It's all of you, my voters. I'm standing in the docket here representing you. He'll change this court case all about repression and being denied your rights rather than the facts of the case that are being adjudicated now. So if you're Donald Trump, you never get out of type, right? And so I think they're pretty good at spinning this. Arguably, these cases have actually been a boon to him politically. Back in February of 2023, he was much less popular until he started getting indicted. And next thing you know, he crushes his primary opposition. And now leads Joe Biden in all of the early polls, looking at the swing states. So I wouldn't doubt that he's got a plan for this that will be workable for him and his voters. But again, convictions matter. It is the end of the line, and we'll see where he winds up on that.
Well, Jeanne, to Rick's point about how these many legal troubles have been a boon for Donald Trump politically, they have brought him a mechanism through which to fundraise, to galvanize the base. They have also brought him a mechanism with which to get a lot of earned media for free. You just talk to the cameras outside the courthouse, whether it's because you are being arraigned or because you have to be there because you're on trial. When this ends, that all goes away. Does it actually start to become a financial consideration? Donald Trump is actually going to have to start spending money to get the same kind of attention that he is receiving now.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly is the king of earned media. All he does is go out and say something absolutely outrageous. And he has to be covered because he's the presumptive nominee. So I suspect he will go more on an outrage tangent if he needs to do that. The reality is that he has made the most that he can about being in court for felony charges. But again, this is not where anybody wants to be. This is a tight election. The idea that you are going to benefit from, being charged with felony counts is, still a stretch. So, he's done the best he can, but this is not a good thing. And Joe Biden has outraised him and does not have to spend the way he does on lawyers.
Flip this around, Rick Davis, and ask you if you're candidate was in fact the incumbent, in this case Joe Biden, would you also be planning for various scenarios, or will it be his job to say nothing and let Donald Trump do his thing in the public eye?
Nothing makes me happier, Joe, than to act like a Democratic strategist. Look, I think Joe Biden's missed an incredible opportunity for the last 6 weeks to frame this entire debate. Why the campaign has taken a hands-off approach in this kind of anemic response this week of having an actor go out and get in a fight with Trump supporters makes absolutely no sense politically. Every single day of that trial, he could have had, various groups protesting outside the courthouse with their talking points on every issue, from abortion to others, that would have framed Donald Trump as a really bad guy. He would be remiss as a candidate if he did not take whatever comes out of this trial and frame it in the best possible light for Joe Biden and the most negative light for Donald Trump. The idea of leaving Trump to decide what the spin is coming off of this trial would be political malpractice.
Jeanne, we only have about a minute left, but do you agree with Rick on that? Is Joe Biden going to enter the game too late on this one?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I too was not a fan, as we've talked about the Robert De Niro, 80-year-old guy going down there to try to get young people to vote for you. But the reality is Joe Biden can frame this if there's a conviction or if there is an acquittal or a hung jury. But what he's got to be out there doing is talking about what a Trump presidency means for people. impact on costs, the impact on the economics, the impact on our privacy and our ability to decide what we want to do with our own bodies, and of course, the issue of democracy and violence. So he's got to stay on that, and he's got to be talking about it. He had a good step yesterday in Philadelphia. He's got to keep it up. I'm not a big fan of the lack of travel this week, but hopefully he gets back out there on the trail in a more concerted and energized way.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors, thank you so much.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We want to go now, though, live here in Washington to Capitol Hill, where I'm pleased to say joining us now is Republican Congressman Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, the chair of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman, Mr. Chairman, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to have you. We have much we would like to discuss with you, including the crypto legislation that has successfully passed out of the House of Representatives earlier this month. First, though, given we are all on tenterhooks right now, waiting to see when and if a verdict comes down in Donald Trump's hush money trial, should the American people have confidence that whatever the outcome here, whether he is acquitted or convicted, that the justice system did its work as designed, because that decision comes from a jury of his peers and fellow Americans?
Well, look, I think there's been a massive amount of targeting of the former president. And obviously we see the politics at play of elected district attorneys that are playing politics, like the DA in Manhattan has done, campaigning on the fact that he was going to take this action in the courtroom. So, but a jury is a jury, and in the United States, they have the say here. And so I have confidence in our justice system that at the end of the day, the right thing will be done. And we should have a belief in our justice system and the rule of law here in the United States. I think that's very important that we all uphold that.
Do you not believe then, Congressman, this trial should be taking place?
The DA that brought the charges, that is arguing in the courtroom, is the one that campaigned that he was going to do this. So that's for people to decide for themselves. I was here to talk to you about financial services policy, which I am the chair of the Financial Services Committee here on Capitol Hill. Not everything is a consumer of what happens to the former president. I'm trying to stay focused on policy and get the best results I can for the American people. That's what I'm here to do.
Okay, well, fair enough, Mr. Chairman. Let's talk then about some of that policy. Of course, you have, during your tenure as the chair of the Financial Services Committee, been an advocate for crypto-related legislation, successfully earlier this month passing the FIT 21 Act, which, of course, is the market structure bill, delineates authority between the CFTC and the SEC. It passed by a wide bipartisan majority in the House. What, though, are you hearing from your counterparts in the Senate about its fate in the other chamber?
Well, the first thing I've heard from my Senate colleagues on the Democrat and Republican side was they were shocked at the wide margin that we passed this bill in the House. FIT 21 is a legal structure for the trading and ownership of digital assets. It gives regulatory form to something that currently has no regulatory form. It provides consumer protection and the ability to get investment capital flowing towards innovation. It's the first of its kind of legislation here in the United States. So for us to pass that important bill, FIT 21, with a 2/3 vote of the House of Representatives in these divided times, it is a major statement. With 71 of my Democrat colleagues voting with Republicans, it is a major statement that we're here to make serious policy, and we want to have a regulated form of digital assets and cryptocurrency here in the United States.
With that said, Mr. Chairman, we spent some time with Congressman French Hill here on Friday, who implied that the momentum that was gathered in the House in passing FIT 21 with a wider margin, to your point, than many predicted was maybe in itself enough to unlock more votes in the Senate. Are you in touch with Chuck Schumer? Do you have a sense of whether this can, in fact, clear the other chamber?
Well, the Senate is in recess this week, so when we get back next week, I'll have greater clarity on that. But the first statement we wanted to have was that, number one, we have serious policy. The second piece of that is a wide vote total. So we have serious policy with a wide vote total. French Hill, being the leading architect of our work in the Financial Services Committee on this important bill, he stated clearly what I believe, which is the momentum is built off that vote total. And the Senate should take this should be a wake-up call for the Senate, that they need to get on with this. They need to stay focused on getting policy here and get it done before the election. I think that's a clear statement of this wide vote in the House of Representatives.
Well, it wasn't that far long ago, Congressman, that the conversation we were having about policy related to crypto that may be able to work its way through the Senate was stablecoin legislation, that potentially it could be tied together with other priorities for some, like the Safe Banking Act, which of course would provide marijuana companies access to the U.S. banking system. Where is progress on that in the House? What is the tenor of your conversations in that regard with Maxine Waters right now?
Well, I'm not in favor of the cannabis banking legislation that's been put forth. I voted against it the last two Congresses. It's not a priority for me to move that legislation. But stablecoin legislation is a priority, and I've been negotiating with Ranking Member Maxine Waters on stablecoin policy for the last 23 months. And we want to be able to move policy, but unless we can get a Senate vehicle from the move stablecoins, there is no closing date for our negotiations. We need a closing date, we need a vehicle, and we need an opportunity to get that enacted into law. Unfortunately, the Senate and the Senate schedule is the focus of that bill. We hope that I hope that this market structure bill that we passed, though Maxine Waters didn't support it, that 71 Democrats voting with Republicans is a major statement. We can move that, and hopefully we can get stable coins prioritized as well.
Is there another vehicle in the rest of this Congress, Mr. Chairman? Is it possible that stablecoin could move as a standalone bill, or you need a bigger vehicle to get this across the finish line?
Well, Joe, I actually think we need a bigger vehicle. What we have not seen in the Senate is for them to take a standalone financial services or financial services bill across the Senate floor since Senate Bill 2155. And what we need here is the majority leader in the Senate to prioritize this policy, either market structure or stable coins, to get it through the Senate. And until that time, we're just going to create the atmosphere and the pressure in the best way we can to get them to prioritize this and put it on the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, the clock is ticking as this is an election year, Mr. Chairman, and it's a year in which you are not seeking re-election yourself, as you will be retiring at the end of your term. Other than this crypto legislation, which, of course, we've spoken at length about and know you have been advocating for so strongly, what else would you like to see accomplished before your time in the House ends?
Well, my three priorities for my chairmanship of the House Financial Services Committee have been and remain data privacy, to ensure that people's financial data is protected in a world-class way. And that means we have to update existing laws that were created before the advent of the consumer internet. That's number one. Number two, capital formation. We have a package of bills led by Congresswoman Ann Wagner that have moved through the House of Representatives. Much of those bills have been bipartisan. And I want the Senate to prioritize capital formation. Third and finally is crypto. And there are two components to that: the market structure bill that we passed with wide support, and the stablecoin legislation that we mentioned before. So that's my package. That's what I'm focused on for financial policy. Last year got a little complicated for us to move those bills through the House because of my involvement in negotiating in the debt ceiling. And then what happened in the fall of last year with a motion to vacate and me serving as Speaker Pro Tem for a period of time. So the House and the calendar got kind of complicated last year, unfortunately. And so this has tipped over to an election year where it's much more difficult to get policymakers to actually be policymakers and focus on policy, not politics.
Mm-hmm. As we spend time with Congressman Patrick McHenry on Bloomberg TV and radio, you just said a lot, Congressman. You have a unique perspective on the House of Representatives, having held the gavel for some time during this process, not to mention your chairmanship. And as you look ahead to the lame duck session, I'm wondering if it's then or if it's maybe sooner that you see the chance for a supplemental request to help pay for the bridge in Baltimore that collapsed when it was struck by that cargo ship. Is that something this Congress will be able to do?
Well, seeing as the last Congress was the biggest spending Congress we've ever had in America, and considering we have record deficits, I think what we're looking for here on Capitol Hill is a willingness to pare down spending in order to pay for that bridge disaster. I do think it's important that our infrastructure be cared for, but we can't just simply keep spending money we do not have. And with a massive set of spending that this administration has put forward that has been the fuel for inflation, I think it's important that we pare down spending, and I think that will be a reasonable trade for us to get funding for the bridge in Baltimore.
All right. Well, Congressman, I want to return to what you were just speaking about a few moments ago, the idea that it has been a little bit hard to actually get the work of policymaking done because you yourself had to serve as the speaker temporarily for a period of time after Kevin McCarthy was ousted. We have seen actual members of the House of Representatives be kicked out of the body. There has been a lot of chaos in this Congress in particular, maybe so much so that you yourself would not like to return in 2025. When we consider the prospects of Republicans keeping the House majority, given everything we have seen, is it really deserved?
Well, that's for the American people to decide. This has been a chaotic time in the body politic of America. That is true. And my leaving has nothing to do with the chaos at this place. The ebb and flow of Washington is a distinct beast in and of itself. And it has tidal waves and tidal functions just like the great oceans of the world. Some predictable, some unpredictable. But it is a place where you can still get things done. I will commend Speaker Johnson for taking action. We had a 2/3 vote on the supplemental appropriations bill to fund our warfighters overseas and our allies overseas. We had a 2/3 vote to reauthorize FISA. We had a 2/3 vote in the House of Representatives to fund our government at the fiscal responsibility, the debt ceiling level. And we had a 2/3 vote to raise the debt ceiling and pare down spending over the next decade, with the largest deficit reduction bill with the Fiscal Responsibility Act's passage in May of last year, about this time. So big things have still been able to happen under Speaker McCarthy, under Speaker Johnson, and that is still possible, even in the midst of crazy politics, the American people undecided about which direction they want to go, whether they want to go to the left or to the right, and these flip-flopping power structures here in Washington that made things even more chaotic. And so I think when we talk about this stuff, we have to look in the broader context of where we are and where the American people are, not just a narrow view of how chaotic the day-to-day of Washington is. And it is chaotic, as it always has been.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much. As you look forward to your future of political freedom, we would love to stay in touch with you here on Bloomberg. Your insights are important to us. He's chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, in a conversation that you won't hear anywhere else. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz. We'll assemble our panel next. Rick and Jeanne are with us, only on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Insights from Daniel Karon, a conversation that I've been looking forward to here as we try to not only read the tea leaves, but prepare ourselves to best understand the verdict when it is read. He's an attorney and professor at the University of Michigan Law School and the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law. Danny, it's great to have you. Welcome to Bloomberg. What's got your focus today as you wait for word on this verdict?
I'm sorry, I talked over your question, please.
What's got your focus today as you wait for the news that we're all waiting for in this verdict?
Certainly. What's got my focus is what you just discussed in your last segment, and that is the jury asking questions. The jury's paying attention. The jury wants to know more. Now, they're not focusing on the objective evidence, the checks, the ledgers, the invoices, the spreadsheets. They're focusing on the more subjective things. The discussions, the meetings between Pecker and Trump and Cohen that went directly toward catch and kill and went toward paying off Stormy Daniels. If they infer the right thing as it concerns the prosecution from these discussions, blended with the objective evidence, I mean, I think Trump's goose is cooked.
Wow. Can you explain, Danny, and we're not experts on New York law, that's why we called you, why certain portions of testimony would still be in dispute? There was a back and forth between the judge and Donald Trump's legal team who was trying to strike certain things that David Pecker and Michael Cohen may have said on the stand. The jury heard this when it was said aloud, obviously. Why is it still in dispute in text form?
Well, because the attorneys can always challenge the introduction of evidence, and evidentiary objections are part of that process. If the defense doesn't like certain language that got in, they can go back again and again and again. Doesn't mean they'll be successful, but goodness, there's no harm in asking. And that's what their job is to do, is to ask, to create questions, to create doubt, to create reasonable doubt. And that's what they're trying to do at every opportunity. So when the jury brings up testimony, their job is to go in and question it again. As many bites of the apple as they can get.
That's fascinating, even when deliberations are already underway. So attorneys can object to transcripts in this case.
Well, they did. It doesn't mean that they'll be sustained. They can object to whatever they want. It's kind of like the old, hey, he can't do that. Well, you know what? He just did. Doesn't mean it'll be sustained. Doesn't mean Judge Marchand will go with it. The judge rules. It's his courtroom. He'll do what he wants. And the jury goes back into the room and continues with its deliberations.
Danny, what's it like in that jury room right now? We've got 12 individuals we don't know anything about, aside from some outside reporting. We were hearing about one of the jurors yesterday, might be a Truth Social fan. But they're in a room together with the world watching and an unprecedented scenario that they're in. Can you decipher based on the notes yesterday, based on the things that they're asking, what the mood might be like in that room?
Well, believe it or not, I've actually been on a jury, and it is the Wild West back there. In my experience, never mind the 55 pages of jury instructions that took an hour to read the first time and another hour to read the second time. When they go back there, they've got their opinions, their biases, their preconceived notions. They will push their agendas. They'll try to get everybody on board because you need a unanimous jury. You need 12 folks deciding beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump is guilty of all 34 counts, not as in a civil trial where the burden is by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning just slightly past 50% if you had, say, some scales of justice. In a criminal setting, beyond a reasonable doubt means all the way. And that times 12 is a tough road to hoe. And we might think the evidence is good and compelling, but boy, you get one holdout, hung jury, whole thing blows up.
And a lot of people think that's exactly what could happen here. What does it mean if your client is forced to sit through all this? And in this case, it's Donald Trump. He's got to be in the courtroom while they're deliberating. We saw he was in a holding room in a video yesterday with Donald Trump Jr. That looked pretty stark. He was sitting in front of what looked like a dirty bathroom door. He had some candy on a desk in front of him. What are the conditions in which Donald Trump is sitting right now in the courthouse?
Well, I've waited on juries too. It's bleak and it's scary. Never mind what side you're on. You've got to be close and accessible, because when the judge says, come on back, or the bailiff actually calls you back, whether it be for questions or for a verdict, I mean, your heart is going like this. You're on pins and needles. You don't know what all is going to happen. You just show up and hope for the best and expect the worst. And he's going through that over and over again. It'll happen continually.
We talk to a lot of legal voices around here on the Daily, and Danny's experience is important to us here.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We hear so much about utilities lately, even in Charlie Pellet's stock market report. Kailey, the drive to harness more power in this country is a very real one. And as we head into another long, hot summer, there are a lot of questions about the resiliency of our grid, not to mention the ability to update the grid, upgrade, if I can say, the grid to handle this new wave of demand from AI.
Yeah, you need energy more than ever. The problem is, especially with the various supply forces that can go into providing energy to the country, you sometimes have intermittency issues.
That's for sure.
And storage issues and the like. And hence why we have seen across a number of states throughout the country in recent years issues with the grid actually being able to keep up with the demand for energy that is out there, whether it's too cold or too hot. Too hot, though, is usually what we consider as we enter into the summer months. And we want to have this conversation now with Elliot Mainzer. He is California's independent system operator CEO, and he's joining us here in our Washington, D.C. studio. Welcome to Washington, Elliot. Thank you so much for being with us. As we head into this summer and consider what California may be in for specifically, how concerned are you about the stability of the grid and whether or not we may see things like blackouts in summer 2024?
Thanks for asking. We're feeling pretty good about this summer. This last several years, just since 2020, we've put over 15,500 megawatts of new generating resources onto the system, including what is now the nation's largest fleet of lithium-ion batteries, over 8,500 megawatts of batteries. So we're now using that dispatchable capability combined with what is a pretty good water year for California and expected reasonable load conditions, and we're looking pretty good. Obviously, we know that we're exposed to a west-wide heat dome or other extreme events like wildfires, but generally we're feeling guardedly optimistic about this summer.
It sounds like battery power is a big part of the solution here to fill in the gaps. To what extent is solar also helping you?
Well, solar is one of the principal developing resources in California. We're now up to about 19,000 megawatts. That's a lot of solar. And the pairing of the batteries with the solar has really been critical. Get into the evening when it's still really hot and the solar energy is coming off the system. That's when those batteries come online and ramp into the system.
So when Donald Trump gets to this in his stump speech, and I'm not going to pull you into politics here, but he's speaking very specifically about this. He says when the sun goes out on a cloudy day, you can't watch TV. Tell your wife you're not watching TV tonight. That's the point of the battery, correct?
Absolutely. And look, in the utility sector, you have to look at everything as a portfolio, right? No single resource can keep the lights on by itself, right? So you have to pair the batteries and the wind with storage. With hydro, we still use natural gas in California. It's part of the equation during the transition. So you have to think of a combined portfolio that can provide both the energy and that capacity, that reliability, dispatchability under all conditions.
Okay, so if you need the portfolio, is the portfolio currently big enough considering the demand is only going higher, be it to power things like artificial intelligence or a changing climate that people are adapting to, or do other things need to be added to the portfolio?
No, it's exactly right. So a big part of our responsibility at the ISO is to be looking out over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years and trying to anticipate the changes that are coming. We do that through transmission planning. We work very carefully with the state agencies who do the load forecasting and the integrated resource planning. And probably one of our single biggest responsibilities, and something that's obviously a real hot topic here in Washington, is transmission. And making sure that we're doing the planning and then eventually the constructing of the new transmission so we can onboard the resources to provide reliability and affordability and economic efficiency, right? So transmission planning and then efficiently bringing these resources into the system is one of our principal responsibilities. We take that very seriously.
I want to get a finer point on the new demand from AI, because this is a huge story that we're following, and I bet it's a big part of your life all of a sudden. The Electric Power Research Institute was out with new numbers this morning. Fascinating to see these regional pockets. Overall, the digital hubs where we see lots of data centers are pulling as much as 9% of U.S. electricity and will by the year 2030. That's up from 4% last year. But the state-by-state graphics here that we're looking at show about 15 states occupy 80% of that total. Yeah. Where does California fall?
California will probably be in I would say in the middle. Maybe it's hard to tell exactly. I think the bottom line is
it growing so fast you don't know?
No. What we're trying to do, as a matter of fact, just literally the week before last, sat down full day working session with the industry, with some of the big tech developers, trying to figure out where are these going to be located, what's the scale, what's the size, what flexibility will they have on the system, what will be their infrastructure requirements. So I would say this topic is hot right now for good reason. Industry collectively is leaning in, trying to figure out what its implications are, where the resources will be distributed, in which states, in which parts of the country, and then move quickly to get the infrastructure ready for them.
Well, I would imagine there is something of a lagged effect, though, in making sure that infrastructure is in place versus the demand suddenly being there. Does demand going upward significantly in this specific area. I mean, it has to go down in other places, like residential conservation needs to be potentially more serious.
So there's a couple nuances to the question. First of all, I would say it's also incumbent on the technology industry and to be working closely with the utility industry and the grid operators so we can anticipate their needs. I think you're seeing better coordination, but that planning coordination, that partnership, honestly, is going to be essential. They're going to be grid citizens. They're going to have big impacts on the grid. We need to work with them to anticipate their needs. The second of all, it can't be coming, one new source of load means somebody else has to come off the system. We're going to have to deal with residential, commercial, industrial, and new sectors coming on the system. Now, that means there's going to be real growth. We also want to make sure that consumers can provide some flexibility to the system, particularly under extreme circumstances. So all of these things have to be thought about and planned for in a comprehensive whole. But you need to do long-term planning to anticipate these needs because, as you know, you can't just turn on and flip the switch and have a new piece of transmission built in 24 hours, right?
I understand you're an accomplished jazz saxophone player. That says to me you know how to ad-lib. How much of this is jazz improv, figuring this out as we go?
Well, I would say, put it this way, I think we know the general rhythm and the chord changes. Okay.
You know what key we're
we know what key we're playing. I think we're trying to figure out just exactly what the scale of this issue is going to be. Okay. I think folks are really thinking hard now. We know that the laws of economics kick in, right? When you have scarcity, prices respond, supply responds, demand responds. I think we're trying to get a sense of just how big is the scale of this demand on the system, and what can the industry do to bring some flexibility to the equation? How do we spatially locate these resources, and how do we put them in places where the costs of bringing the additional infrastructure are not so high that we have ratepayer revolts, right? That's going to be affordability is going to be a real consideration here.
Coltrane or Sonny Rollins guy?
I wouldn't be willing to pick between the two.
All right.
Both. I'm going to go with both.
Glad we met you, Elliot. Thank you for coming to see us today.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having
Elliot
me.
Mainzer,
Good. Thank you.
Runs the California Independent System Operator, essentially the grid in the great state of California. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.